Shipping is the backbone of global trade, but today it also stands at the crossroad of one of the greatest transitions of our time, the move towards greener shipping and a climate-neutral future. As the maritime sector looks to drastically reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, a wide range of alternative fuels are being explored, and among them, hydrogen belongs to the list of possible candidates. A fuel with potential to deliver zero-emission operations, capable of transforming not only how ships are powered, but how energy is produced, stored, and transported across the sector. But hydrogen also comes with significant challenges, concerns to infrastructure needs, costs, and regulatory gaps. The path towards its large-scale deployment is far from straightforward. So where do we stand today? Is hydrogen a realistic solution for maritime transport, or a longer-term ambition that still requires major breakthroughs? In this webinar, we will explore both sides of the story, the opportunities and the challenges, bringing together different perspectives to better understand the role hydrogen could play in the future of shipping. Welcome to Tide Talks Episode 2, Challenges and Opportunities of Hydrogen as Marine Fuel.
So good morning everyone, and welcome to Tide Talks Episode 2 on hydrogen. Today I'm joined with Mercedes, Carlos, and Lanfranco. As you may have guessed from the title, today we will explore a bit the opportunities and challenges of hydrogen as a possible marine fuel, as an alternative fuel. Mercedes, you have met her already in the previous episode on ammonia, Lanfranco as well actually. Mercedes is an officer of sustainability unit. She manages issues related to alternative fuels as well as other files like port reception facility and any other environmental matter. Lanfranco is an officer of the safety unit. He will walk us through some of the safety challenges and opportunities of hydrogen as marine fuel. And Carlos is the new entry for today. Is also an officer of the sustainability unit, working specific on greenhouse gases files, both at international, like IMO level, and the EU level. So, before starting with a bit of the matter at hand, I would like to do a small recap of the international and EU legislation when it comes to the uptake of alternative fuels and how the international and EU legal framework works in that regard. Carlos, would you like to give us a brief overview of the IMO greenhouse gases strategy and the net zero framework strategy first?
Yes, so let's start with a quick overview. As Armando mentioned, the IMO have both the IMO net zero framework together with the strategy on greenhouse gases that set the direction for the decarbonization of international shipping. At a high level, it's basically, we can summarize it in 4 key points. The first point will be the reduction of CO2 emissions per unit of transport work on an average across international shipping by at least 40% by 2030 compared to 2008 levels. The second one will be to reduce the total annual greenhouse gas emission from international shipping by at least 70%, striving to reach the 80% by 2040, compared also with 2008 levels. The third point we have is to increase the uptake of zero or near zero greenhouse gas technologies, fuels or energy sources, that would represent at least 5%, also ideally 10% of the energy used by international shipping by 2030. Finally, the fourth point, it will be to reduce the total greenhouse gas emissions, so the achieve the net zero greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping by or around 2050. These are the four main
These are the four, let's say, main drivers when it comes to IMO and international level. I would like also to recap a second, and then I go a bit to you, Mercedes, on what happens at the EU level. So the EU, on the other side, has committed to become climate neutral by 2050 and to reduce greenhouse gas emission by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. To achieve this objective, the Fit for 55, which is what you're seeing on screen, package was launched, which includes the Maritime Decarbonization Policy Framework, which has several steps up to the reduction of up to 80% until 2050. Mercedes, could you please outline how this Fit for 55 package works for us?
Okay, sure. Yes, at its core, the idea is to drive the transitions to low carbon fuels and renewable fuels by using a set of legislation that work all together. So you can see here 4 pieces of legislation. On one side, we have the ETS, the emission trading scheme, that it was applicable to the maritime transport since the beginning of 2024, is a carbon price. So the emissions, CO2 emissions has to be monitored by the shipping companies, and they will pay, will rent allowances in accordance with the emissions that they have. So at the end, it's a financial, say, incentive for the companies to reduce the CO2 emissions. We have also a second big piece of legislation, the Fuel EU. We have seen the scheme or the period for the transition for greenhouse gas reduction in the Fuel EU in the previous slide, let's say. And this legislation, the the Fuel EU Maritime, what is considering is to consider from well to well the emissions from the shipping from the shipping sector. The idea is to reduce in comparison with 2020 emissions and with a strict reduction over the years to achieve the 80% reduction by the 2050. It's also another incentive for reducing the greenhouse gases. And we have on the other side 2 more pieces of legislation. The AFIR, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, that what is said is because we need to have infrastructure for the new alternative fuels or new. So the idea is to promote that the ports provide this new infrastructure for this bunkering or onshore power supply for the ships when they become at berth. So this is another way to promote this uptake of alternative fuels. And the last piece of legislation is the Renewable Energy Directive that also promotes the availability of the new alternative fuels all over the Europe, not only for the maritime transport, but for other means of transport. So at the end, we have these 4 pieces of legislation that try to incentivize and encourage the shipping sector to move to a new, better, to go for new renewable energy sources of energy and reduce the emissions from the shipping.
Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you, Carlos. This is more or less when it comes to from a sustainability point of view, and I would like to briefly go to Lanfranco to know what happens on the safety side of alternative fuels and specifically hydrogen, since that's the matter at hand of today.
Yes, as you can imagine, within this framework sketched by Mercedes and Carlos, the angle of safety could not be forgotten. So here we have, looking at international level, so beyond the European rule and legislation, the IMO that has started a broad program addressing the safety of new fuels and technology solutions at large, ranging from wind to nuclear, ammonia, hydrogen. Now, coming to hydrogen, the last MSC, MSC 111, has finally adopted the interim guidelines for the safety of hydrogen as fuel. We do not have yet a number on the circular. I was just checking minutes before coming here to this broadcast. However, the guidelines are adopted and enshrined for the time being in a working paper. On the other hand, the interim guidelines for fuel cells that also deals with hydrogen were already approved a few years ago and now are undergoing to a revision before eventually becoming mandatory. These are at international level. At European level, we have no one single piece of legislation addressing the safety of the hydrogen. However, we have several instruments that are out there well known. For example, the ATEX directive, which classifies the hydrogen as a dangerous chemical in the highest category, together with acetylene, and in which it is expressly established that the level of safety of the equipment that have to deal with the hydrogen, where lower level equipment cannot be used. They are deemed not safe. The pressure equipment directive is another piece of legislation that is important, that contains important provisions for hydrogen, and classifies, of course, the gas as a dangerous gas, and mandates strict third-party verification and material testing for the problem of the embritter. You could see before on the screen the broad.
Yeah, we're seeing it right now.
Yeah, the broad and still incomplete list of standards, rules, and legislation that are available today to deal with this important chemical. One last thing to conclude, because we are broadcasting from the European Maritime Safety Agency. Europe is a powerhouse when it comes to dealing with this technical gas. There is a lot of experience out there that our industry have, and that the maritime sector is gathering and taking advantage of this experience that already exists in our sector.
Lanfranco, you mentioned the IMO guidelines. Would it be possible just briefly to outline what are its main principles, let's say, and what are the criticalities, the critical aspects that you would like to, for the audience to know, like that is important to know?
Okay. In the few time that we have, we can only jump a little bit here and there. The first important thing to say is that these guidelines are stemming from the IGF code, so a code that was devised for liquefied natural gas mainly. And therefore, the principle of the safety barriers coming from there. However, the legislator felt the need to specialize this IGF code for this specific fuel or chemical, if you want, because of its characteristic. There are a couple of principles that probably is worth to highlight here, that are very high level and enshrined also in other guidelines, such as the fact that a single failure should not lead to a disastrous consequences, or the concept of gas machinery, gas safe space. These two principles that seems to be quite general and very high level have in fact profound consequences in terms of design. For example, the notion of machinery gas safe space leads to the consequence that every single component inside the space should have at least a double barrier, and the space should be inerted to guarantee that possible leak of hydrogen do not lead to a explosion atmosphere. One other consequence of this that was enshrined in the guidelines of the IMO, as well as in a study that we as EMSA have carried out, is the fact that the emergency shutdown concept and technology solution is deemed not sufficient for hydrogen for two reasons. The first one is the fact that in fraction of a second, hydrogen can create an explosive atmosphere. The second is that the detection cannot follow this speed of detection. Therefore, the emergency shutdown is insufficient to protect the space. And this comes as a consequence on the designer that they have to provide for the entire fuel system a double barrier with inerting features in this double barrier. The other element that I want to highlight, because here as EMSA we have a little bit of a different angle, and we can maybe explore later, is the fact that in our consideration we would suggest that a source of ignition is always present when you deal with hydrogen, even if you have put in place all the safeguards that are contained in the guidelines, like, for example, non-sparking equipment. We would suggest this because of the broad flammability of hydrogen, and therefore even on open deck the natural ventilation may not be sufficient to guarantee that you do not reach this condition of flammability. And as well as in closed space, we do not consider ventilation sufficient to avoid the achievement of the explosive atmosphere because of the characteristic of hydrogen that we mentioned earlier. The number of air changes would easily reach more than 100, which is of course not sustainable, not technically feasible. So as a consequence of this, you need to consider that you may have a flammable and explosive atmosphere at any moment in an environment where there is hydrogen, and therefore double barrier, inerting, and explosion risk analysis are the tools that should be used.
Now, following on this line, just very briefly, since we have been discussing about what are the, let's say, the criticalities of using hydrogen as a fuel, how can be, I mean, knowing a bit about the industry, as you mentioned, and this has been a lot of experience with handling hydrogen, what would be the best way to store it, and how could we store it, let's say?
Yes, this is well-known physics, so to say. In the IMO guidelines, we are looking mainly at two different methodologies, liquefied hydrogen and compressed. Of course, these are not the only possibilities that exist to store hydrogen. If you want, these are physical means of storage where you act on temperature and pressures. However, there is also the chemical storage of the hydrogen that ranges from metal hydrides to hydrogen carriers like methane or ammonia, as well as to carbon nanotubes or methods that deal with absorption of hydrogen on complex surfaces. However, as I said, in the IMO guidelines, as far as the maritime civil sector is concerned, liquefied and compressed hydrogen are those that are addressed in terms of safety in the IMO work.
Thank you, Gianfranco. And now that we have, let's say, exhausted the legal framework side and a bit of technology that I think we will explore a bit more later, I would like to know why is hydrogen seen as, let's say, as a promising option for decarbonization in the maritime transport? Maybe Carlos.
Yes, Armando, we are talking about not only decarbonization, but also reducing air emissions as a whole. So together with the greenhouse gas, we also have the relevant substances, mainly sulfur oxides, particulate matter, and hydrogen appeared as a very interesting solution because, first of all, doesn't have sulfur in its content, either carbon. And in relation to the use of hydrogen directly as on internal combustion engines, okay, we will not have sulfur oxides, okay. We will have something which is a very, very low percentage of what we call the pilot fuel, which is used usually conventional fuel, but in gas oil, intermediate fuel oil, that goes into the engine just to spark and start the combustion, but it's incomparably lower. Okay, also to the conventional to the usage of conventional fuels. So this is both from a greenhouse gas and air pollution perspective. So the reduction will be very, very effective. In relation to the production of nitrogen oxides, which is something that we are very, very focused on nowadays, the high temperatures of particularly on the internal combustion engines, it's definitely something that we should be looking into, and we are already looking into it. In relation to the use of hydrogen in other technologies, such as the fuel cells, as Gianfranco was saying, it's also a very clean technology, so any clean, very clean fuel, because what we get from the fuel cells is energy and water as a product of
Yes.
Of reaction that we can be stored or shipped overboard or used for any other means. And basically, that's it. It seems a very promising energy source.
Thank you, Carlos. This is actually quite helpful. It gives us a bit of an overview and also tells us what type of pollutants are not present, which is very important. But Mercedes, could we maybe take a look on how does it perform as a fuel compared to other alternative fuels. And I know that we have a table that we're going to pull up right in a second to help you a bit navigate through all the factors. But I think it would be interesting to have a bit of a comparison.
Yes, I think it would be very nice to have this comparison because, as Carlos has mentioned, the possibilities of hydrogen are very good if we take it. Talking about sustainability, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, when we compare and other pollutants, when we compare it with the conventional fuels or even with LNG. So here you see that we have this table when you can see if we compare with heavy fuel oil, marine gas oil, or LNG regarding the N2O emissions, we see that for hydrogen in a combustion engine or in a fuel cell, it's not present. It's the same for the methane. It's low in marine gas oil or heavy fuel oil. It's a concern in when we talk about LNG, but it's not present when we talk about green hydrogen. This is the same with sulfur emissions and metals. It's the same with the carbon, the CO2 emissions and hydrocarbons. Again, we don't have any presence of volatile organic particles and so on. So it's a good candidate to replace that. We have the even particle metals not present also. And when we consider the CO2 emissions, and it's depending on how you manufacture the equipment on board, you will have more or less, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we can take from the how to produce things till how you burn it, not only to consider the oil itself, but with the if you use carbon storage systems, you can reduce the CO2 emissions. It's the same with the NOx, as Carlos just present to us. The concern about the NOx is only when you burning it in an engine, TSNLG or combustion engine, let's say. But you can use a selective catalytic reduction system to capture this and to reduce the emissions. And there is only another concern about the emissions produced by hydrogen, that is this indirect release to the atmosphere or a small quantity perhaps of hydrogen when they are stored in tankers because of the boil-off gas.
Mm-hmm.
They could be, but this emission will be very, very low. It's calculated about 1% per day. So if you compare it with the reduction of emissions, that will be even nothing. So they are the concerns about the emissions. So in general, the performance is very good.
Thank you, Mercedes. And the table, I mean, it's also quite clear. Also, from a coding perspective, it's quite easy to see that in terms of performance, it seems like either they are not present, the pollutants, or they are very minimal in specific conditions. Before going back 1 second to Lanfranco, I wanted to remind all of you that are listening to us that you are able to write us questions if you want in the chat. We will look at them. While we finish, we will have a small 5-10 minutes question and answers. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but feel free to do that. We will read them at the end. Lanfranco, when it comes, I wanted to shift briefly to technology, on the technology used on board. And where do we actually stand in terms of propulsion? Now we have seen a bit the potential of hydrogen as a marine fuel. What are the benefits? With you, we discussed a bit about the safety concerns. But where do we stand in terms of propulsion? How does that work on board?
Yeah. Now, the main use to date is in fuel cell. The large application, the broader application so far that we know is implemented on board is through hydrogen carriers, like for example methane, that is reformed and hydrogen is extracted and used in fuel cells of various kinds. In terms of direct use in internal combustion engines, the numbers are still relatively small, as we can see here. These are data that are taken from the alternative fuel database of DNV. And when we look at the hydrogen, we found 3 ships in operation and 10 other small ships be delivered by the end of this year. So, as you can expect, the numbers are still very limited for various reasons. One of those was, of course, the lack of legislation, which now is being addressed at the IMO, but there are technical challenges, as we discussed briefly, that needs to be solved. Secondly, I would say that at the moment, the cost of hydrogen of producing it is relatively high. So burning it into an engine that has 50% efficiency might look like not a good idea. So you prefer to use fuel cells that have higher efficiency.
Thank you, Gianfranco. That's very clear. When it comes to the use of hydrogen, is there let's say, would you find like a big operational disadvantages? I mean, Gianfranco mentioned briefly the energy efficiency. Maybe we can connect to that on any operational disadvantage that you can point out for us, and just to start to understand the fuel a bit better.
Okay. Yes, I think that the main, perhaps, operational challenges will be the energy density of hydrogen, the material compatibility, and the flammability, as Gianfranco was explaining a little bit. If we talk about the energy density, you can see now a table, and if we compare the energy density of hydrogen with marine gas oil, for instance, I think is the 5th column, you will see that, okay, the energy density of hydrogen is if you compare it with marine gas oil, it's very low. And that can be seen in the storage column. That is one of the, I think it's the second column starting from the right. That if you consider the storage capacity of marine gas oil 1, and we compare it with the need for the same storage capacity from hydrogen, it's about we will need 4 or 5 times more hydrogen than the conventional fuels to obtain the same energy. So from the point of view of the operation of the ship, then the ship owner, the shipping companies need to take this into account, because or they increase the bunker capacity, or
let's also not forget that ships are a bit limited in size as well, so you cannot increase
you
this.
cannot increase because you will reduce the cargo capacity, what is the interesting thing for the ship. But the other alternative would be perhaps to increase the bunker operations, that it's also have an extra cost for the operation of the system. So it will be, for me, I think it will be a challenge.
Quite of a challenge.
Yes.
Thank you, Mercedes. And Carlos, I would like also to go back a second on when it comes to the materials that are used on board for, let's say, for storing the hydrogen, for pipes, on any other equipment that is relevant when you talk about hydrogen. Could you walk us through a second for that?
Gianfranco already mentioned about it. It's hydrogen. It's one of the smallest atoms that we find in nature. So depending on the type of metallic and non-metallic crystalline structure of the materials that we use on board ships, either will be on storage tanks or the inner shield structures of the tanks, piping arrangements, piping spools, joint gaskets, weldings on any type of both structural and non-structural tanks and piping arrangements in generally. In general, it's basically hydrogen can go around and can replace every single spot that is left out of this at grain level of any type of the structure, as you will see in the picture. It's and the hydrogen tends to stick on the grain boundaries of any impurity. So, and it's extremely difficult to find a material which does not suffer from this left spaces from fabrication defects or pre or post heat treatment that we often do on board ships and on this equipment. It's basically there is another challenge which is not related to the hydrogen embrittlement, but mainly to low temperature, but actually on exactly the opposite. So at high temperatures, more than 200 degrees, what we call the high temperature hydrogen attack that can go in certain equipments on board the ships, which may not be so common on fuel piping arrangements, on fuel nozzles, on pressure vacuum valves, but are usually happen. So on storage tanks, we will not have this. It will be very uncommon for these structures to be suffering from this from the high temperature. But when it comes to the internal gearing material of the internal combustion engines, for instance, then we could have such problems. And that in that case, the carbon will react with hydrogen to create methane. And also we will have also the material embrittlement, but produced from high temperature, not a low one. And this is basically, you can see for the table that is shown, and it comprises of both non-metallic and metallic materials, and the compatibility, the material compatibility of these materials together with different phases of hydrogen in gaseous form, in a liquid form. It's something that it's super relevant for us to consider it, both in the design and as also in the operational phases.
And also because we can have them in both, let's say, physical phases on board, so that creates challenges for one physical phase and not for the others, and vice versa. So
exactly,
that is very important to take into account.
We could have material suffering from this embrittlement, for instance, when it's stored at the liquid phase, and after the evaporation, we can have this gaseous fuel going into an internal combustion engine, and we can suffer from the high temperature. Yes.
Thank you, Carlos. Franco, I would like to go back to you a second. We've discussed about some safety, let's say, challenges. Could we wrap it up a second and walk us through to give a bit of an overview of what it makes it particularly challenging compared to a conventional fuel, like to really give us a conventional fuel and hydrogen, what are the main difficulties? Let's say.
Yeah, many says the hydrogen is different, and in fact is. Probably most of all three characteristics. The broad range of flammability, from 4 to 75% in volume. That is amazingly enormous if you compare with the other fuels. The basically vanishing ignition energy, that is again of at least one order of magnitude less than other fuels, which means that any source of ignition ignites the hydrogen. You can be sure of that. And the exceptionally fast laminar burning velocity, again of an order of magnitude higher than respect to other fuels. These three characteristics are probably those that make hydrogen quite challenging to deal with. Then there are other characteristics like the size, that is the smallest molecule that we know, and certain, let's say, molecular characteristics of the hydrogen, especially when it's liquefied. It's liquefied at cryogenic temperature below 250 degrees, and then exists in two molecular spins, ortho and para hydrogen, and the transition from one to the other release heat, and this release must be controlled. If you have a tank, this creates boil off that you need to manage and deal with beyond the normal boiling off of a refrigerated liquid. Normally, this transition is completed in a couple of weeks after liquefaction, so it should not be a huge element of concern, but still is something that need to be considered.
And when it comes from a risk management perspective, what are the open issues that can enable and support safe onboard use, bunkering, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, well, this is a broad.
I make it easy, no?
Yeah, this is a very broad question. If I'm not mistaken, in our EMSA study that you find available on our website, there is an analysis of accidents that has been taken from the IAT database, made with our contractor, an analysis of around 600 accidents that this database contains. And there are basically, I would say, as many other situations, two big groups: failure of components, failure of the operators. It's interesting in first place to understand how the human error is triggered, meaning that why the operator choose to do that specific action at that moment, because this can be again a failure in the design. These are all business to business application, one of a kind. So the bugging of the design is sometimes a complex matter. But this brings us down to a consideration on the reliability of the components. Reliability is something that it's dealt in the maritime sector in a very specific way, not like other industries, and therefore this poses some challenges to us. One of these challenges, I think we can identify again in the IMO guidelines, where very interestingly the legislator there agreed to use an IC standard as the tool to evaluate the possible size and therefore amount of hydrogen that can be leaked. The size of the leakages that are foreseen in this standard are extremely reduced and small, because this standard normally works outside the maritime sector together with standards at large that provides for safety integrity level of the operations. That is something that we as a maritime sector, we do not use. And therefore you find in our EMSA considerations the idea that this standard is insufficient as is used, and therefore a full bore rupture of the systems should be considered in the analysis, and considered especially in the explosion risk analysis, to evaluate the consequences of a leak of this size and of this type. And I will stop here.
And we also have a bit of a picture there.
Yeah.
Just for the. Thank you, Gianfranco. We are almost wrapping up, and I would like to pass towards hydrogen to see that more of an umbrella view when it comes to infrastructure supply, more not only on, let's say, on the marine side. What would be the main barrier when it comes to, also bearing in mind what we discussed about Fit for 55, the infrastructure of hydrogen, the supply of hydrogen? What would you see that are the main barriers for the wider use of the fuel?
I think that the main barrier would be to have green hydrogen, because we will be in competition with other sectors about this green hydrogen. For the production of the green hydrogen, we need green electricity. That is also now very demanded by all the transports and everywhere. There is this need of electricity, because for the production of the hydrogen, we need water and electricity. The common way to produce hydrogen is the electrolysis of the water, and it's green when we use green electricity. There are other colors of the hydrogen, but nowadays the one that is more commonly used is the gray hydrogen. That's produced from conventional fuels, fossil fuels. We have also the one that we call blue hydrogen. That is the one that produced using fossil fuels, but then you capture the CO2 before it is released to the atmosphere. And there is a new, a new hydrogen. It's the gold or white one. That is the one that is naturally, that you can find it in the earth. There are some geological resources of this. It's very, very small, but there is also this possibility. But the main problem here will be to have this green hydrogen. For that, we will need, electricity, green electricity. And that will be perhaps the main challenge when we talk about how to, because we will need more quantities of green hydrogen, and we will be in competition with other sectors.
And based on what you just said, how Taking into account the time frame 2030, 2050, what would be how realistic is the large scale availability of hydrogen?
In our study, because we also, in the EMSA, we also produce from the sustainability point of view.
There are several studies online on the EMSA website. I forgot to mention, but during the discussion it came up. There is a study on the sustainability, more let's say, orientated towards the sustainability of hydrogen as marine fuel. And as Lanfranco was mentioning, there is also a study on the safety of hydrogen.
Yes, but in the one that the possibilities or the potential use of hydrogen as marine fuel, there is a prediction on the availability of green hydrogen. And from one side, we have the prediction about the renewable electricity. And now you have the figures in the screen. And there is a prediction between the availability and the need.
If you can see then on the screen, sorry, Mercedes, to jump on, because I know that it's a bit small, but I hope that they can see that, like for each and every one of the graphs, you have on the left-hand side the predicted availability in 2040, while on the right-hand side of each of the graphs, you have what is the expected, how much it is expected to be required.
For the shipping transport. So the first one is the renewable electricity. So the production, you also see the production in minimum and maximum. So because it's a prediction, so the minimum and the maximum that it's foreseen, and the same with the requirement of green or renewable electricity for the shipping transport. Then in the middle, you have the production of green hydrogen, and then you have seen that the production of the availability of green hydrogen is very low if we compare it with the requirements from the maritime.
Exactly. We can see that only basically most likely is the renewable electricity production would be the only one who actually goes well above what is required, because obviously it's a requirement not only for the maritime industry, but for all the rest, but all the other two factors, they are a bit more limited.
Yeah, because the green, we see that the green hydrogen will be low, the requirement will be the availability will be less than the requirement, and this is because the electrolyzer capacity. So the electrolyzer capacity, that will be the one that will be the bottleneck for having this green hydrogen, as the electrolyzer capacity production is not enough for the requirements that we will have.
Thank you, Mercedes. Carlos, are there any other environmental factor that you would like to point out that should be taken into account?
Apart from the main challenges that Mercedes already mentioned, the hydrogen production will basically require a huge amount of water if you want to split the water molecule into oxygen and both oxygen and hydrogen. So fresh water, as you know, starts to become a rare source, and some say it will be in a medium term future will be even more precious than gold. On the other hand, salt water, if we use salt water, so the desalinization process and the removal of brines could also injure the marine biodiversity and in the ocean. The amount of energy that we would also be looking into would either have to come via solar or wind propelled turbines. So it's a huge amount of energy that needs to be captured from the renewable sources, preferably for the production, and we should also avoid having the indirect land usage, which is a sustainable criteria that we that will look into the Renewable Energy Directive in order to avoid having a huge amount of deforestation coming into reality in order to replace the previous natural carbon capture flora, and replace it with crops or anything. So we the amount of space is also a matter of concern. Actually, there's a very interesting movie, one of the latest James Bond movie, for those who like it, explicitly talks about this issue, about the scarcity of water, the amount of energy that is used, and even the whole complex that Daniel Craig needs to go into. It's actually run on fuel cells and hydrogen, and it's a very interesting, just for
Thank you, Carlos. And last question for you, and then I have a closing question for each and every one of you, very, very brief. If you had to identify any critical actions necessary in the next, let's say, 5-10 years to unlock hydrogen in shipping, what would those be?
Mercedes already touched upon a very relevant issue about the energy density and the almost 5 times more bunker capacity that will be needed in order to have the same amount of energy available for both propulsion and auxiliary power on board ships. We also, so that will basically mean that either we increase the storage capacity on board, which inherently or consequently it will lead to the decrease of the cargo capacity, or we have to bunker more frequently. So, and that, to our minds, may lead for the hydrogen to be more suitable for short sea trade, at least at the near future, and not so much for the large liners and the deep sea ships. On the other hand, there's also, and something that it's worthwhile to mention, there's a lot of expertise, mainly coming from the transportation of hydrogen as cargo. Okay, so there are hydrogen carriers which have for a long time transport hydrogen in a liquid form. So there's a lot of expertise, mainly from the IGC code at the IMO, and there's a lot of knowledge also on the petrochemical agent industry that could also be used to fill in some of this knowledge into our maritime sector. And basically for the certification of seafarers, for everybody that works on the land-based infrastructure and on the bunkering operations to the ships, yes, definitely the training is something that we have to be looking to in a greater detail.
Thank you, Carlos. And now, very quick last question for all of you, like to close the session. If you would point out to one specific barrier to the uptake of hydrogen as marine fuel, what would that be? I start with Mercedes, since you are here on my left.
Okay, as I mentioned before, I think that to ensure the availability of green electricity to produce the hydrogen, and also the need for to increase the electrolyzer capacity, that would be the main barriers, I think.
Also ensure the competition with other sectors, as Mercedes already mentioned, because maritime plays a small part, yes, and we also need to take that into consideration. The high costs associated, mainly energy costs associated with hydrogen production, and as well the whole, so scaling up the infrastructure will be something that will take time and will take also a lot of investments, because the production of energy from the is something that it's being noticed in other sectors. The production, the distribution, and storage, which are the three fundamental factors in sustainability, at least in relation to electricity. It will take time to scale up and to be cost effective.
Thank
Yes.
you, Carlos. Last word to you.
Safety culture has to step up to higher standard.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for participating to this webinar, and for you online to following us. I know that throughout the webinars we're discussing a lot about the challenges and the barriers. That is a bit human nature to try to find what are the difficulties. And nevertheless, we need to remember what we said at the beginning, that as a marine fuel, as a possible fuel, hydrogen bear almost no emission as far as this is proven, besides the small emission related to pilot fuel. That is something that we really need to bear in mind, because that is one of the key objective when it comes to decarbonization and air pollution. And hydrogen, let's say, does tremendously well in that regard. Obviously, we discuss a bit about more what can be the difficulties on board, what are the safety aspects that need to be considered. And so the discussion obviously led a bit more towards the challenges, but the ultimate opportunity when it comes to that, we don't have to forget it, is really when it comes to the absence of emissions mostly. I see that there is no questions in the chat besides one which asks us the name of the speakers, so the full name of the speaker. And I don't say that because I don't remember all the last names of the sentence.
Okay, no. Mercedes García Orrillo.
Okay.
Carlos Alberto Antunes Pereira.
Lanfranco Benedetti.
Thank you very much. And I am Armando Graziano, Officer of Capacity Building. I actually forgot to introduce myself, but sometimes it happens. I thank you very much, all of you, for being with us today. This was the second episode on hydrogen. We will have a third one by the end of the year, which will be published on our social media, on EMSA social media, specifically on LinkedIn, so that you can keep track of it. And we will see you very soon. Thank you to the three of you for being with us today. And thank you all from home for having followed us. Thank you.